company.
Yeah, I want to bring into the conversation now Professor Omékongo Dibinga. He is a professor of cross-cultural communications at American University, and he's also a rapper. He's been on the show before. I always turn to him on these topics of race and hip-hop culture because he is an expert. Good morning and welcome, Professor Dabinga.
Morning.
You heard Ian say that in his multicultural group growing up in Long Beach, and even to this day, there are people outside the Black community that if he understands their intentions, that they love him, that they are allies, that it's okay. But who gets to make that determination? Who gets to give, one group of person or one individual a pass? Or is that even the way we should be thinking about this?
I don't think that is the way that we should be thinking about it, because that intentions don't equal the knowledge of history. And one of the challenges that I have as an MC is when I deal with other rappers who might be younger than me and people believe that these Black rappers can give them a pass. Oftentimes, these rappers don't know the history of the word themselves. So in some instances, it's like the blind leading the blind. And so if people feel like they get a pass from their friend and they think that that gives them permission in some way, shape, or form, then that has dire consequences for the rest of us. And speaking to what Midas was talking about, growing up with this international friendships that he had, we also have to we have to think deeply about the global implications of this word. Because I've been in countries like Senegal and other French-speaking countries where they don't even speak English, but once they hear my accent, it's like, oh, what's up, ma? And then they throw it out there. Their intention is to be cool, but does that make sense for people to be getting off the airport in places like Japan dressed in a business suit and people see them and say, what's up, my N-word? I think that that's very problematic. And furthermore, when we have this conversation about hip hop, I think we can all be honest here in saying that the majority of the times that we use the term N-word in hip hop, the majority of the times it's negative. So this whole conversation about we're using it as a term of endearment or empowerment, lyrically, is factually inaccurate.
Okay, and we're going to talk about that because Jay-Z and other rappers have taken that position, that they've taken the sting out of the word, they've reclaimed it. What do you say to that, Midas? Because Professor Dabinga says that's BS, that by saying it, we haven't destigmatized it, that it still carries that history of being a racial epithet that's been used against us, and now we're using it against each other.
I respect what Doctor is saying, and I think we're assuming, though, that the two words are the same, and I think we shouldn't do that. Those are two separate words, right?
So you're talking ER versus A, right?
I disagree with that, but I'm sorry.
That's fine, but from my perspective is that are two different words. The word that was meant to kind of harm us was the ER word. And since then, my grandmother's grandmother took a word and made it something of endearment. And I just believe those are two separate words. When I hear the ER, my ears automatically perk up because I know that's meant as a form of disrespect. I think white people, to be honest with you, I think they want to use the word because the word without the ER, they want to use it because that's the word that we use and they want to be cool. I think they can't say it. Once we put it in the music, that I agree with Doc. Once we put it in the music, then it's free game. Because to be honest with you, white people are the consumers of the music. So if we're putting it out there, then we're not the only ones rapping it. They're rapping it word for word for word. So when we hear it, and I'm saying this as a catch-22 because I use the word too. So I have to expect when it comes back, I have to have a different type of reaction to it. I haven't got to that point yet. I'm not that mature, but I do understand, that they want to use the word. When you go to a concert and it's 20,000 people to see Kendrick Lamar and they're rapping this word over and over, they're not pausing at the word, they're not pausing at the A, that's their form of being a part of everything. So they're able to say it though.
No, you raise a good point, Midas. Let's take a look at the video that sparked this entire conversation. It's country singer Morgan Wallen. Let's take a look at what he says.
Hey, y'all too? Yeah. Hey, take care of this pussy ass motherfucker. Oh. Hey, Gracie, take care of this pussy ass.
It's a little fuzzy, but what we do know is that he used the word, and let's presume he used the ER version of the word. He was using it as a racial slur. And he has suffered some consequences. He had contracts that were canceled, music taken off the air, but he also had fans that came to his rescue and who wanted to make sure that his record remained at the top of the Billboard charts. So, what are we to make of Waylon, who has suffered some consequences, but yet fans? What about his fans that are saying this is okay? Let's keep buying his music.
I think we have to keep an open line of communication, though, and I think once we shut down and we're not talking to other races and other people about how the word affects us, where it comes from, like Doctor was saying, the actual meaning, like Dr. Pryor was saying, way before anything else, way before it got to rap and way before it got to music, there's been hundreds and hundreds of years of those words, though. And so to act like people aren't saying it, I think we have to be smarter than that and have these conversations.
But you're saying that, Midas, that once it's out in the vernacular, once it's in the culture, that we should expect white people to use it too. So, Ian, do you think it was a mistake for Waylon to be dropped from his contract and for his music to be taken off the air? If you follow Midas's argument, then what's the big deal?
I'm not a fan of telling people what they can and can't say, but I do think they need to use discretion. I think Black people should, I think if Black people don't like how someone is behaving or words that they use, or the way that they move, they should just not mess with that person. They shouldn't buy their music. They shouldn't purchase their product. I don't want people telling me what to do. I don't want people telling me what I can and can't say.
Okay, Ian, I want to know, do you think the companies that dropped Morgan Waylon's music, should they have done that because of his use of the word?
Personally, no. But I believe if you're a fan of music, and you don't like that particular artist because of their values or how they behave, then just don't purchase their music. But I don't believe that.
On this. Aaliyah, do you think that it was the right decision for the companies that dropped Morgan Waylon to do so?
I do, honestly. I think that it's a reflection of your company when you permit certain things. So if they were to completely ignore it, they're in a way endorsing his behavior. So I do think that it was the right thing to do because, as he said in his own apology, there was no excuse for his actions. There's no situation or circumstance that made it okay, and he took accountability for that. And he said that he's going to face the consequences, and reasonably so. I also disagree that once we allow artists to use the N-word in their music, then it's okay for everyone else because, as I said before, it's not the same meaning. If a candle maker walks into a shop and asks for a lighter, you're not going to think anything of it. But if a known arsonist walks into a shop and asks for a lighter, there's a completely different meaning to that. And it's the same thing with the N-word when it's used by the in-group and versus the out-group. So I think that his use wasn't justified because other artists are using it. And I think that, he's facing the consequences of his actions, and rightfully so.
Dr. Dabinga, you reject this in-group, out-of-group argument.
Yes, I reject it.
Consequences, and you would say rap artists that use the word should face similar consequences.
I don't believe in the in-group. I understand it, but I believe at the end of the day, if the root of the word is negative, whatever way you try to morph it is always going to be negative. We wouldn't have the N-word with the A at the end if we didn't have the N-word with the ER at the end. So the roots are the same. And so when we hear, and like I said, when we hear it in hip hop, the majority of the time it's used with the A, it's also negative. So, and going to the conversation about once we put it out there, KRS-One said that mic you speak through goes from here to Mogadishu, and how you represent us is the issue. So I respect what Aaliyah is saying about just because it's used on the airwaves doesn't give people permission, but who's educating the people who are listening on the airwaves? I've been in South Africa having this argument with people who think they can use the word. No one's teaching them. And so I believe that the English language is beautiful enough that we as MCs are smart enough that we can use other language. And I'm talking about all types of words, whether talking about N-word, F words, B words. I don't believe in that in group if the root of the term is negativity. And I don't believe you can reclaim a word that you did not create. I see your books there in the back of you. I can't go and reclaim them. I can only steal them. And that means that they were not originally mine. We need to come up with new words use better words, and we're smart enough to do that and teach the world how to do it just through our music alone.
How did you get?
You're a rapper. You use the word regularly. You said in your music. Would you be willing to reconsider the use of the word based on, your education, reflection? Is there a point where you can imagine rapping without the word?
Yeah, absolutely, and I do. It's not an every song thing, and I don't think as an artist though, I should have to watch my pen, watch my paper every second to make sure that I'm giving comfort to the audience. That's not the point of me being an artist. If not, I wouldn't put music out. I did want to ask Doc, because when he said that the word is used most of the time negatively. How do you figure that? Where do you get that from?
Yeah.
Well, when I hear people in songs talking about, I'm gonna shoot up these N-words, I'm gonna kill these N-words and their kids, like Biggie talking about going into people's funerals and doing that. I mean, Tupac said the term means, never ignorant, getting goals accomplished. But if you listen to most of his albums, that term is used in pejorative sense. And so the majority of hip hop that I've heard people say I put my N-words on and stuff like that, but the majority of the time it's used to talk about things in a violent nature that is disrespectful to the community. And so I feel like we can use better terms. And I understand what you're saying about it's not our job to really watch our pen, but I think that we do, because in lieu of watching our pen, we're actually informing other people that it's okay to use this word. And so, for example, real quick example, I took a bunch of kids from the hood where I grew up in Roxbury, Massachusetts, to South Africa. They had never been out the hood. They had white friends and everything, no problem using the N-word. We got into an altercation with some white people in South Africa who started calling them the word. And they said that was the first time I ever experienced that type of hostility. And now that I've learned, I'm not gonna use that word anymore. The problem that I have is, people like you and me, Midas, like, we're educated, we can have this conversation, which I really love. But I think we both know that, unfortunately, the mainstream media, they pull these rappers out there who know nothing about the history or the use and just say it's all good as long as they buy in my music. And so again, it's the blind leading the blind with people who aren't educated enough or knowledgeable enough to have this real conversation about a word that we really don't need in our music at all, which is why I've never used it on any of my albums.
I know. I just worry because it's such a blanketed term when you use these rappers, and the rappers I listen to don't use it in that way.
Myself as well.
Yeah, so give us some examples, Aaliyah. Let me ask you, give us some examples of rappers that who use the N-word, the A version that Midas is talking about, in a way differently than what Professor Dabinga has described.
I wouldn't even say specifically rappers, but artists in general, R&B artists as well, use the N-word. And it's not, I think that you're equating the content of the song and prescribing the meaning of the song and the nature of the song to the word. In these senses that you're giving examples of, the N-word is just a way to express, or a replacement for man or person. It's not used to insult them. It's just a replacement. You will go on Twitter and you'll see people using the N-word as a blanket statement for people. It's a replacement for the word people, for an individual. But there are many songs where it's like they're love songs, and they'll talk about their partners in reference using the N-word. So it depends on the music you listen to. Maybe the songs that you've heard, or the hip hop music that you've listened to is negative.
Leah, I think both of you are right. And I think we have to be real clear. Now, we're not going to sit here and dishonestly say that rap songs aren't using the N-word in a pejorative way. Come on, we got to be honest.
I won't say completely, but I wouldn't say all rap music.
Not all.
So what I said was the majority of the hip hop that I've listened to, and I was very clear about that. But I would also add to the fact that even outside of our conversation right here, I teach at American University. I've been teaching there for 6 years. The majority of my students, overwhelming majority, are white. And when I ask them, they love hip hop, and I ask them, survey every semester without fail, do the majority of the times you hear it in the words, is it used positively or pejoratively? The answer is always negatively, overwhelmingly. So that's all. And they're listening to a new generation of hip hop guys that I don't even know about. So even this, and I'm talking hundreds of students over the years. So even if we may have different opinions based on the music we listen to, I'm talking about the mainstream production and how it's being consumed. This is what the hundreds of students I've been teaching for years are saying to me.
Yeah, and I think the problem we have is that I agree, Aaliyah and Midas, if people come to the word with an understanding of the history, but how many people understand anything about history or know anything about history? And we're talking about a really small percentage of people, whether they're black, white, yellow or green. So I think what makes people so uncomfortable about the word is that when you are hearing young white consumers of hip hop repeat the word, and then we try to tell them that they shouldn't use the word, that the retort is always, but why? You guys use it, you use it, and getting folks to understand that history of reclamation, if you agree that that's even possible. How are we going to educate all these young white consumers of hip hop that it's okay for Kendrick to talk about the word or to use the word, or for Midas to use the word, because they see it as a word of empowerment differently than when white folks out of the Reconstructionist South use the word? I don't know if we can educate folks, enough people, quickly enough, in a way that would ever cause us to be comfortable.
As I was saying before, the language we use depends on who we're talking to as well. And I think in hip hop, generally, when rappers are putting out music, their target audiences aren't young white people. It's young black people in the community, black people who understand their struggle.
Midas, who buys most of the hip hop? Young white folks or young black people?
Young white folks.
Okay, so I think the money people, the dollar people, the people that write the checks in hip hop are very clearly aware of who the demographics are. So I don't.
That doesn't necessarily mean that white people are the target, though.
Right. Absolutely.
Just because white people are consumers, that doesn't mean that they're the target. So I think that's an incorrect analysis of what she's saying.
So your position is because rappers are targeting other African Americans, that they're speaking to them in a way that they expect them to understand. But what about this history? Dr. Dabinga says he's taught, hundreds and hundreds of students, and they say whether it's intended for them or not, it's the way they perceive it. So you may have the intentionality, maybe what you're talking about, Aaliyah, may be there.
Yeah.
But if the receivers on the other end, whether they're black or white consumers, if they don't understand that framework, are we missing out on something?
I completely agree that people should be educated on the history. That's the reason I wrote that entire article, but I think a lot of people are aware of the history. I think that a lot of people also, when they're caught using the word or when they're told they can't use the word, they feign this ignorance, oh, I didn't know, or they'll still challenge it and say, well, if you can use it, why can't I? And it's that whole in-group, out-group. The rappers who are making music about their struggle, they don't expect these young, rich white kids to understand that. So when they're using the N-word, it's the in-group meaning. I know that, some of you don't agree with reclamation, even though there's, studies that show and evidence that show that it's a common trend within different discriminated communities using different slurs, but the meaning is different.
We don't disagree with that, Aaliyah. I guess though, but it seems like we're cutting it really, the nuance here is, I think, is what has me hung up, because you said you don't use the word, but you have the same history, whether it's your first generation, second generation, but somebody in your family probably was a slave. So you have as much of a right to claim that you come from that oppressed group as I do, as everyone else on this call does. So why can't you use it freely?
I can use it. I just decide not to because I understand that some people are not comfortable with it. If I was with a group of friends and frequently among a group of friends who use it regularly, I probably would, use it more often, but I just am not in that environment.
And let me ask you, Dr. Dabinga, Ta-Nehisi Coates, who we all have a great deal of respect for, a brilliant writer, he argues that in the context of hip hop, whites should never use the word. But he says that blacks should be able to use it because it's one opportunity where we get to do something that whites don't get to do. And they should have this experience to go through life the way we have to go through life, with things that they cannot do. So when you have someone like Mr. Coates, who's so well respected and obviously has such a keen sense of awareness around our history and the race issue, says he's fine with the word.
And of course, I definitely have a lot of respect for Mr. Coates and his work. I just feel like we can create other types of experiences that are just our own. We can put out music celebrating things, relating to our hair or our skin tones and so on and so forth. We don't have to take a word that was given to us from white people and use that as saying something, this is something you can't use. So as far as I'm concerned, the term is originally theirs. And so when people may compare it to other terms like MF and things like that, it wasn't like on housing deeds that you can't sell this house to an MFer or an MFer can't live in this community. It was Black people, and oftentimes that N-word was used. So I believe that Black people are intelligent enough and creative enough to create other experiences that white people are not able to engage in that don't involve using a word of such a negative history. And I do understand that reclamation culture is real. I just don't believe in that. In the idea of, as a motivational speaker myself, I believe, again, if the root of the word is negative, it can never be anything else but that. And we got other words. We got brother, sister, hockey, all other types of things that we can use. There's no one thing that attaches us to that word more so than our history of slavery in the United States. And
can I respond to that? Because I noticed he brought up my example of MFer, and I just like to say the reason why I use that example is because ultimately we're discussing whether or not it's okay to use the word, and I'm just following my convictions. I personally do not like to be controlled by somebody's use of language. So I had to change my perspective and my understanding of it. And ultimately, we are talking about energy and intentions. That's why I use the MF, for example. Of course, it's not comparable to the N word.
But why won't any of us rappers then use the K word on the albums then? Right?
The K word.
Because we know that the albums will be pulled. We know that if we got, label representation. And so I understand about the individual.
Well, you have to use discretion. You have to know where you are. Like,
what's the K word?
I'm talking the Jewish slur. That's
okay, got it.
Right? That's what I'm talking about. Like, we know not to use that. We saw what happened with Michael Jackson, and they don't care about us and how it got pulled off the shelves. Right. And so my thing is, like, I understand about personal freedoms, but as artists who are speaking to the world, whether we're artists, rappers, host shows, we're writers, columnists, I believe that there's a greater level of responsibility that we have that the average person who isn't involved in speaking to the world just doesn't have. And I think that we need to take that a little bit, we need to look at that a little more heavily, given how popular this particular word is. And we know we're not going to use other words on our songs because we don't want our careers to end.
Well, I don't.
Right. We're using discretion.
Guys, my producer's telling me we're out of time. This is a great, big, complicated subject, and we are just getting into it. So that means I got to have all of you back because we got to have this conversation. But before I let you go, I asked a question. My Black History Month trivia question was, who was the first legit rapper? And so I'm going to ask you, all of you are very familiar with hip hop culture. Was it the Sugar Hill Gang? Was it Curtis Blow? Or was it Gil Scott-Heron?
Gil Scott-Heron.
Gil Scott.
All right,
they said.
all right, my producer, everybody. We had this big debate. So my production team, we played a little Gil Scott, which is the correct answer. He's considered the first legit rapper. His song, recorded poem, 1971, called "The Revolution Will Not Be Televised." They listened to a little of it and said, "Oh, that's a poem. That's not a rap song." So they still wanted to claim that it was the Sugar Hill Gang. But you guys are all obviously well steeped in your Black history and your Black rap culture. So you got that one right. Thank you so much. What an interesting conversation. We don't all have to agree, but I think it's, just amazing that we're having this conversation. And the only way we're going to get to any place of, I think, understanding the roots of this word is by having these really sometimes complicated, big, messy conversations. So thank you so much for joining me this morning. And thanks for everything that each and every one of you are doing to shed light on this really complex subject.
Thank you for having me.